students, and welcome to video 1 in chapter 2.1 demand. So we've finished unit 1. So if you're following the video sequentially, we finished unit 1 and we're now going to start unit 2 microeconomics, which is our first really big topic. If you're SL, it's going to be 30 hours of class time. HL, it's 70 hours of class time. So there's a lot of HL content in this unit. So there are 12 units, 12 chapters in the unit of microeconomics. And you can see that some of the chapters in blue are just HL, and then pretty much every chapter has some HL content within it. So it's a bit confusing where the HL content is kind of weaved into the SL content. But during my videos, I'm going to try and make it really, really clear where it's HL and where it's SL. And as much as possible, I'll try and do just HL videos. Where it's HL content. So I've kind of broken micro into 4 sub-units, if you like. This part here is supply-demand, so we do demand-supply equilibrium. I'd say this is possibly the most important part of the whole course. A lot of economics is kind of built on this foundation of supply and demand. So really, really important that you know supply and demand very, very well. Then we've got elasticities and a bit of role of government. Then market failure part 1, which is the SL part with this kind of bit of HL. And then the last part is your market failure HL. And this market power is quite a long chapter. So that's the main part of this part thing here. This part thing here, there we go. Right, so let's move on to demand. We're going to break this into 3 chapters. Today we're going to do the first 4 learning objectives. Then we're going to do the rest. And then we're going to do a short HL video with HL only. So what is supply and demand? Well, you've probably heard the term supply and demand before. People are saying, well, the price is high, well, it's just supply and demand, isn't it? So you may have also seen news articles like this, floods likely to cause increase in apple prices. And so supply and demand, that's what this is. We're looking at the forces of supply and demand and how they change prices in the market. So when we see prices changing, it's usually because of something's happening with supply and demand. And our goal for the next 3-4 chapters is to kind of explain how supply and demand changes price. And 2.1 is demand, 2.2 supply, and then 2.3 will be how those interact to cause changes. So firstly, we need to define the term market because we're going to use this term a lot. So a market, when we think of market, we probably think of something like this or maybe a supermarket or something like that. But a market is any place, okay, any place. It can be physical or non-physical. So physical means we can actually go to the shop. Non-physical maybe means we can't go. So maybe it's something online or something like that, where buyers and sellers of a good or service come together to buy and sell and exchange information. So in a market, buyers buy goods and services. So let's use a supermarket, for example. Buyers go and the supermarket sells to us, and buyers can buy goods and services. Sellers can sell them, and we also exchange information. By exchange information, what that means is maybe we go to the supermarket and we look at the prices, or maybe you go to a shoe shop and you say, well, how much is this pair of shoes? And you're just trying to work out how much things are so that you can make a decision about purchase. We can also do this online. Maybe we go to Amazon or we go to other websites to find out what's available, what colors are available. So exchanging information, we don't always go to markets to buy things. Sometimes we go to find out and what's available. And then market forces are the events that happen in the market that influence the price of a good or service. And we're pretty much talking about supply and demand here. That's what we're going to go into a lot of detail with. All right, so let's start with demand. Demand, I think, is intuitively the more easier to understand of supply. And I'll explain why in a minute. So what we've got on the left here is we've got a demand schedule. So a demand schedule is a table that shows the quantity demanded at each price. So let's kind of work out what each of that bit means. So quantity demanded is the amount of goods and services that people are willing and able to buy at a given price during a period of time. So for example, at a price of 20 euros, I realize I've got dollars in the table, but euros here, but the currency doesn't really matter here. So at a price of 20 euros, let's choose euros. At a price of 20 euros, the quantity demanded for shoes is 35 million. So what that's saying is if the price in the market was 20 euros, then the number of shoes that all consumers in the country or the market want to buy is 35 million. And then similarly, you can see if the price increases from 20 euros to 30 euros, then the quantity demanded will decrease from 35 million to 30 million. And I think this kind of makes sense. We're all consumers. We all go and buy things. And I think that's why demand is a bit easier to understand. So we know if we're going to buy something, we're going to buy a pair of shoes. If the price goes up, we're less likely to buy it. So therefore, the number of shoes that will be sold or the quantity demanded will decrease. This then brings us on to the law of demand. So the law of demand says, as the price of a good or service increases, the quantity demanded will decrease. Ceteris paribus. Remember, this is this assumption from before, all other things remaining equal. And in the next video, we're going to look at what about if things don't remain the same. Maybe income can increase or things like that. So this is law of demand, the relationship between price and quantity demanded. As price goes up, quantity demanded will decrease and vice versa. Now, one other thing to note in the definition of quantity demanded is willing and able. So at a price of 20, we can see that the quantity demand is 35 million. That means people are willing to buy the shoes, but also able to buy the shoes. So you might say at a price of €1 million, we all want to buy a Lamborghini, for example, but a lot of us are not able to do it. So it must mean that people want to buy it and are able, and that means they have the money available to buy it. Okay, on to the next slide. What we can then do, if I just move my head over here, we can then take the demand schedule. The demand schedule is the table, and we can put this onto a diagram over here. So on the diagram, when we do supply and demand diagrams, we always put price on the y-axis. It's always price on the y-axis, and it's always quantity on the x-axis. And here it's quantity demanded because that's what we're measuring. So when we plot all these points, we get this line here. We're going to call this a demand curve. Now, I know curve we often think of as like some sort of bendy line, but straight lines are actually a curve. It just means it's a curve with no curvature. So in economics, we often draw demand curves as straight lines just because it's easier to draw a straight line than a curve, but some books do it as a curve. So what we're going to see is we're going to get this negative or inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So like we saw with the law of demand, as the price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Hence, we get this negative inverse demand curve. And this shows the law of demand, like I just said. We have this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Demand curve, I talked about that. Yes, it's a straight line, but it is a curve. And here we have a movement along the curve because it's caused by a change in price. So we then move on to the next slide, and we're going to just briefly describe what I mean by movements along a demand curve. And in the next video, this will make a little bit more sense because we're going to distinguish between movements along a curve and shifts of the curve. So the next video is going to be about what happens when the whole curve shifts. But for now, when we move along a curve, it's just caused by a change in price, and we move from one point on the curve to another point on the curve. And you can see that I've labeled those 2 points on the curve to a different quantity demanded. And at the moment, this might not make a lot of sense, but when we put everything together, it kind of does help. But the key thing here is if the price changes, we just move up and down that curve. And this is a big misconception because often we think when the price changes, then demand changes, and therefore we're going to get a new curve. But no, because the price is on the y-axis, a change in price just means we move up and down this curve. All right, the last thing for this video is the relationship between an individual's consumer demand and the market demand. So an individual's consumer's demand curve is the amount of goods or service that one person is willing and able to buy at a given price. So for example, here we got consumer A. So this is one person, not the whole market, it's one person. So this person, if the price of shoes was $10, then they're going to buy 8 shoes. If the price is 20, then they're going to buy 7 shoes. And again, we got that law of demand. As the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. And what we can do is we could then draw this demand schedule onto a demand curve. So this is the same as the previous demand curve, but this is just for one person. And all of us have our own individual demand curves. What we can then do is we can construct an individual demand curve. I've said that. If we then take all consumers in an economy then we can construct a market demand curve. I actually got no space for my head. I can put my head down here. The total amount of goods and services that all consumers are willing and able to buy. So we've got consumer A. We then take another consumer, which is consumer B, and this ... means all of the consumers within the economy. So earlier on, we saw that at a price of 20, the market wants to buy 35 million shoes. Well, that comes from if we add together all of the individual consumers within the economy. So within the economy, there might be 20, 30 million people, depends on the size of the country. And if we add together all of the individual quantity demands at each price, we then get the market demand. So that's the relationship between the individual consumer demand and the market demand. And so in order to get the market demand, we then horizontally sum. And what I mean by that is we sum like that. So you can see that at 20, we do 7 plus 14 plus all of the consumers within the economy. And that will then equal 35. And that's how we get the market demand curve here. All right, we've done the first 4 learning objectives here. A lot of that's quite abstract. In the next video, we're going to look at why the demand curve might shift to different places. I'll see you then.